We are spending 22 minutes today with former New York City Police Commissioner Ray Kelly. Pleasure to have you here, Mr. Commissioner.
Good to be with you, Bridget.
Let's talk about the book. It's called Vigilance. Why vigilance?
Well, I think I have been vigilant most of my life, working for the government, the police department, the Marine Corps. And I think we as a nation have to be vigilant, certainly from here on out, at least for the foreseeable future. There's a lot of threats out there. It's a dangerous world. We see what's happening in the Middle East. We see events such as Paris and San Bernardino. So I think we have to be on guard. And what we usually say is, look at your world through the prism of what happened on 9/11. Everybody's world changed. So you have to just be aware of your environment, your surroundings.
Right, and I want to look at your world and your career a little bit in the prism of your childhood. And the book is very interesting. You talk about growing up on the Upper West Side, a New York City boy. What was it about your childhood that made you want to be a police officer? Was it something that you always wanted to do?
No. Interesting. Yeah, West Side, I grew up on the West Side. It was a different West Side then than it is now, a little rougher. I can't afford to live on the West Side these days. But I didn't have any particular affinity towards policing. As a matter of fact, we didn't always love the police in the Upper West Side in those days.
Why not?
But what happened, well, it was just being as the police, they're going to perhaps cause you trouble, or you did some mischievous things, and you're always looking for the police out of the corner of your eye. But I had a part-time job in Macy's when I was going to high school and college, and my mother got me that job. She worked in Macy's, and Macy's was very good to my mom and good to me, but I wanted something a little different, and I happened to read about a police cadet program, which was an effort to get matriculating college students into policing, to do a sort of part-time work and learn about policing, become police officers, and stay for a career, hopefully. So I was in the first class of police cadets in the New York City Police Department. And I must say, I found it very fascinating. It was exciting. I was in the communications division, and it seemed to be the center of the universe. Calls were coming in, 24 hours a day. It was, you felt like you had your finger on the pulse of the city.
Very quickly, I got to ask, what did you sell at Macy's?
No, I was a stock boy.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's when you could use that term, stock boy.
You weren't selling hats to anybody.
Some kind of associate or something. Yeah.
Okay. Now, not only did you seek various education degrees, right? St. John's.
Yeah.
Got a degree at Harvard too.
I did, and I must say that the police department enabled me to get all of my education. As I say, the cadet program is what I started with, but when I came back from the service from Vietnam, I wanted to go to law school, and I was able to go to law school with the GI Bill, working around the clock in the police department. Then, following that experience, I went to NYU Graduate Law School with a couple of people that I studied with in law school, and there was Law Enforcement Assistant Act money that was available, so that funded that schooling. And then I went to Harvard. And through the Police Foundation, I was able to get some funding for it. So I owe just about everything I have to the New York City Police Department. It's a great institution, and it was great for me.
And you mentioned your service. Yeah. You were in Vietnam,
I was.
A Marine. You followed your brothers into service, correct?
Exactly. I had 3 older brothers in the Marine Corps, and I was fascinated by the Marine Corps too. When they came home, they would have sea bags full of equipment and some books and things. So I was basically, I knew I had no choice. I had to go to the Marine Corps.
You had to do it. How did that inform your work as a police officer and then later as a commissioner?
Well, I say that just about everything I learned about leadership, I learned in the Marine Corps. I think they have a very good way of teaching leadership traits, leadership practices, and I use those things that I learned today. I mean, I used it throughout my whole life. I actually have a little divider in my Franklin planner that has the Marine Corps leadership traits, and I find it sort of a centering. It's sort of a grounding experience to look at those things and think about them. So, yeah, it was another. I was involved with 2 terrific institutions, the New York City Police Department and the United States Marine Corps, and I learned an awful lot from both of them.
And your work as a police officer, you write about the 70s, tense times, the Nation of Islam mosque shooting, Officer Cardillo, and then fast forward to the 90s when you served your first stint as police commissioner under Mayor Dinkins. The Crown Heights riots were going on at the time. And at one point in the book you write, more and more the story of New York was becoming the story of race. How would you compare the racial climate during those turbulent eras to today?
Well, certainly in the 70s, it was very tumultuous, and I would have to characterize race relations as not being good. It was the time of the Black Liberation Army. In 1971, we had police officers shot and killed by the Black Liberation Army, Officers Foster and Laurie, and we had Piagentini and Jones, which was a little bit before that. In 1971, there were 15 New York City police officers killed, 12 by shooting. And it just was a very difficult time. And you could understand the police were sort of uneasy and sort of fatalistic about whether or not they were going to be hurt. In the 90s, it was somewhat different. I think Mayor Dinkins and the police department and his staff, he did a lot to address some of the tensions. Crown Heights situation arose, and I put it in the book. I think, quite frankly, people tried to be politically correct, and as a result, that incident continued much longer than it should have. And now I think race relations are much better than they were, certainly when you look back 40 years. But you have these terrible incidents. You have the shooting of Walter Scott in North Charleston, South Carolina, which is a murder. I mean, there's no other way of describing. You have the incident in Chicago. You have these videos that will always be out there. And I think that has set back relations with the police somewhat. But I know a lot of police executives, or a lot of really young, aggressive, proactive police chiefs throughout the country are trying to address these problems and getting closer to the community. It's a constant struggle, no question about it, because of what police do. You know, police are the bearers of bad news. They use force. They sometimes use deadly force. So you have to work at it every day. There's always going to be some tension someplace.
You say in the book, you're not like the firefighters, a little bit of a different thing. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
And everybody loves a firefighter.
Right.
Even me.
And you talk about race being a part of the conversation during those years, and certainly now.
Yep.
And now, of course, there's been the discussion about the broken windows policing, and that the city council wants to enact some changes and sort of give police the option to maybe make an offense, something like public urination, littering, make that a civil offense rather than a criminal. To the heart of the matter, do you think that that is the correct philosophy under which a police department needs to operate, broken windows?
Well, as a general approach, the goal of these regulations are to deter people from doing these acts. I don't think lessening the penalty or lessening the consequences of what you're doing is particularly helpful in that regard. I mean, people are talking about, well, it may address some of the summonses in too many warrants that are out there. I mean, that's another issue. I personally don't think it's particularly helpful to quality of life to sort of reduce the seriousness of these offenses.
Why not? What do you think? What do you think can happen?
I think it will not deter people. That it will be seen as something less important and less serious than it is now.
And then what happens?
Maybe we need more. Maybe we need to exact some penalties of people who don't answer these summonses, as far as getting their licenses or those sorts of things to have people pay attention.
Last summer, we had the pictures in the tabloids of homeless men urinating in the streets of New York. That sort of got the conversation about this going again. I mean, do you see more of that type of thing happening if the city does ease up on broken windows?
Well, I certainly don't see it going in the other direction if we ease up on it. I mean, I don't think that's the way to go. We know that there's a lot of concern now about homelessness and quality of life, and I think that's a move in the wrong direction if we take them out of the criminal environment or criminal law. You know, some of these things are violations, but they're still in the in the penal law.
Right. Right. And do you believe that what some people would call a stupid offense or a minor offense, do you think that in terms of the person who committed it, that will enable them to want to commit a more serious crime if they're not penalized?
Oh, you mean, does the concept work? No, look, if you go to a community meeting, if you're a police executive, you go to a community meeting, that's basically what people talk about. They're concerned about their quality of life. They're concerned about loitering and people urinating on streets, that sort of thing. So you have to respond to these things. I mean, you can argue that, hey, if you let these things go, people will commit more serious crimes. I'm not certain we have a great study that shows that, but people are concerned about the immediate event. You can go to some of the busiest areas in New York City, places that you have, a higher level of shootings, violence, that sort of thing. And yet the people are talking about noise and, parking in a driveway or that sort of thing.
Right. What's going on in my neighborhood?
Quality of life is a big issue. 311, I think, works in addressing a lot of those things. So, I personally would not back away from the penalties that exist now.
Right. Stop and frisk, of course. There's been a lot of back and forth between you and the current commissioner. Do you believe, Commissioner Kelly, that the current commissioner has been fudging the crime numbers?
No, I can't say that. I don't have enough information. The numbers that I talked about were shooting numbers when I was with Greg Floyd. I was surprised at the reaction. It was sort of a personal attack on me. I didn't mention the department. I didn't mention the commissioner. I think the appropriate answer would have been, oh, we'll take a look at that. Because if you promote people or they get assignments based on the numbers that they produce, you always have to be concerned about the veracity of those numbers. And sure, the possibility of the numbers not being accurate.
Right, and we had the mayor on the air a couple of months back and asked him about the controversy, and as you say, it did turn up to be kind of a big deal. And he said, well, we use the same metrics that Commissioner Kelly used. Is that
the same metrics? Does it mean
in measuring crime statistics?
In measuring crime, the question is what's the credibility of the reports. So I don't want to keep beating a dead horse here, but it's not the question of metrics. Yeah, crime is a crime. The question is what is the quality of the information? The report, is it being reported accurately or not? These are questions for the media to ask. I have a full-time job now. I have to look at other things.
You do. Let's talk a little bit about terror, because of course the name of the book, Vigilance, and you talk about not one, not two, not three, not four, 16 plots being foiled during your tenure. How did you transform the NYPD from a crime-fighting unit into an anti-terror organization as well?
Well, Mayor Bloomberg was elected 56 days after 9/11, and we knew that we had to do something different to add sort of a higher level of protection to New York City. I was the commissioner in 1993 in the first World Trade Center attack. So we had two major events, horrific, the killings, the death in 9/11, 2,700 people here, right here on, Manhattan Island. So we knew we had to do something more. We wanted to supplement what the federal government was doing, not supplant it in any way. So we created the Counterterrorism Bureau, the first of its kind in the country. We reformed our intelligence division. We brought in first-class experts from the federal government. Frank Labuti, a Marine Lieutenant General, headed our counterterrorism efforts. David Cohn, 35 years in the Central Intelligence Agency. We had a whole series of what I would call all-stars. Michael Sheehan, Richard Daddario, Richard Falkenrath came in with top-flight credentials. We brought in analysts from some of the top schools in the country. We honed our language skills. We put on major recruitment efforts. The police department now has police officers born in 106 countries, giving them tremendous language capability and the ability to interact with the communities in the most diverse city in the world. So we work closely with the FBI. Some of these plots, they were just foiled by luck. You know, we didn't know about it until it happened. For instance, Faisal Shahzad, the individual who drove into Times Square, May 1st, 2010. We didn't know anything about him. It wasn't on anybody's radar screen.
Right.
And he tried to detonate a bomb right next to the Marriott Hotel, and it just fizzled. But that was sheer luck. It wasn't so much of a foil. There were 16 attempts. And yes, they were foiled by, some of them foiled. Good work by the FBI, good work by the NYPD. And as I say, luck. And we'll take luck every time.
And yet some other terrorists were aware, weren't they, of how much stronger the NYPD was at fighting terror, and they didn't try to go ahead with their plots because of that.
Yeah, we had those indications that, and quite frankly, that's part of our strategy, to let individuals know how strong the city is and how well protected it is, and don't come here. We don't want them to go anywhere, but certainly don't come to New York City. That was the message.
And the mechanism that you, in a sense, set in motion, can that be effective against, you know, God forbid, a San Bernardino style attacker, or a more coordinated attack like Paris?
You certainly hope so. There are no guarantees. I mean, New York City has done more than any other city to protect itself from a terrorist attack, but there are no guarantees. You know, there's a lot of police deployed on the streets of the city, and it should be able to respond quickly. But you can also go where the police are not, and that's something that you have to watch carefully. That's why intelligence is just as important, if not more important, than uniform deployment. You need information that is going to hopefully lead to identification of these people who are plotting against New York. Not easy to do. There's a lot of tradecraft out there now in terms of protecting your messages, protecting communications used by these folks. So it's getting tougher and tougher to identify.
Do you see the NYPD currently using enough of what you're talking about, being proactive enough in that regard?
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, I think they are. I think they're doing a good job. They certainly have devoted resources to it.
Right. You mentioned Mayor Bloomberg, and that's when you got back in the game and became the police commissioner. Everybody's talking about former Mayor Bloomberg now maybe jumping into the presidential race. Do you have any inside track on that? Do you think he'll do it?
You know, I think he's obviously going to test the waters. Whether or not he jumps in, I don't know. I personally believe he was the best mayor in the history of our city. He came in right after 9/11, had tremendous challenges on his plate, and in many ways the city was never better under his watch, at least in my judgment. I think he can do anything. I think he certainly could do the job. I think the real challenge is now, how do you get there? And it's pretty difficult. I mean, it's, the electoral college and getting enough votes, because that's ultimately how people are elected, through the electoral college. And but I would probably guess that Mayor Bloomberg has spent a few dollars having people research this.
Right.
But even so, I mean, it looks like it would be a uphill climb. But he can do it. I wish him well.
Yeah, and a lot of people are also asking about whether you're going to run for mayor. I asked you this before, and you said no comment. I'd love to get a comment from you. A lot of people want you to run. Will you?
I'm flattered when it's mentioned, but I have no plans to run for any elective office.
None. Are you saying, is that a
I have
flat?
no plans.
You have no plans.
No.
What could make you change those plans?
Not much.
Nothing?
I'm happy doing what I'm doing. I have a great job. I have a variety of things that I've been engaged in. I have a little bit more leisure time, so I think what I'm doing now is working well for me.
You mentioned that Mayor Bloomberg has some people sort of testing the waters and taking a look. Do you have any people who do that, who are checking the landscape just to maybe try to needle you into doing it?
Well, I mean, people do talk to me, but as I say, I'm happy with doing what I'm doing now.
In the acknowledgments of your book, you talk about your sons being your best friend. Your son on television. Do you watch him?
I do.
You do?
I do. I find him.
Do you talk to the TV when he's on?
Hilarious. I DVR it because I'm not always able to do it, but I find him terrific. Very smart and very funny. And the same with my other son. When we get together, we have a lot of laughs because they both have great senses of humor, and they're very, very bright. And of course, Veronica, we have to have Veronica, who is she's the hub, and we're the spokes. She holds it all together.
I was going to ask you if they got the humor gene from you or from Veronica.
I think from both.
Yeah.
You know, I have a bit of a funny side that I try to hide, but.
So I have to ask you this. We've been asking our guests on this relatively new program. You know, I got to spend 22 minutes with you. If you got to spend 22 minutes with somebody, is there somebody you can think of that you would just like to talk to or interview?
I can be dead or alive.
Yeah, sure.
I would say Winston Churchill. I've
Oh,
been
wow.
reading a lot of his writings. By the way, he was a terrific writer, but he had some tough decisions to make. He certainly wasn't always popular. The decisions he made they weren't always popular. He went up and down in people's opinion, but he was a fascinating individual. His mother was American. And I just fascinated by him. When I pick up the book to read, it is so well written, you know, and he get that through the English educational system, that ability to write, to put words in such precise order and to make such great sense. So yeah, I like to, you know, Churchill. He actually wrote a book in 1903, I think, when he was a reporter. Reporters could be in the military, that type of thing. Right. And it is, it's the Malacan Field Force. It's about basically what Afghanistan and Pakistan now. This is required reading by the U.S. troops, at least officers going to Afghanistan. And this is written in 1903. Wow. So much insight into the psyche of people in that, you know, in that area. So yeah, I think Winston Churchill would be someone I'd very much like to speak to.
I appreciate him as a leader and a writer, you being a writer yourself. And again, the name of the book, Vigilance, My Life Serving America and Protecting Its Empire City. Ray Kelly, so wonderful to speak with you.
Brigitte, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner.